In NASCAR, change is all but inevitable. And in many cases, all it takes is one significant moment in history to make the sanctioning body completely rewrite the rulebook. So today we're going to take a look at races through history that forced NASCAR to change the rules. It happens more often than you think. One rule that has undergone a litany of changes over the past few decades is NASCAR's green-white checkered rule. And almost every change to this rule can be traced back to one specific moment in time. In the 1990s, NASCAR operated under a loose policy where they could red flag the race for minor incidents that happened in the closing laps to avoid a race finishing under the yellow. But the race would always end at the advertised distance. In 1993, NASCAR did this at Talladega, and it led to a violent crash with 2 laps to go that sent Rusty Wallace airborne. A few years later, NASCAR attempted this again in the closing laps of the 1997 Pepsi 400. In an extremely rare restart with only 1 lap to go, another multi-car crash was triggered that injured Mark Martin. 5 years later, at the exact same race, the 2002 Pepsi 400, NASCAR was faced with yet another late race caution. But instead of operating by their previous procedures, NASCAR decided to run the last 4 laps under yellow, which made fans throw beer cans and various other objects on the track as Michael Waltrip celebrated his victory. NASCAR then had to clarify that they would not throw a red flag with less than 5 laps remaining, and any cautions after that point would end the race. Although it wasn't related to a late race restart, I can't help but feel like Dale Earnhardt's passing the previous year also affected NASCAR's decision to not restart the race. Only a couple years later in 2004, Jeff Gordon was declared the winner at Talladega because he was ahead of Dale Earnhardt Jr. when Brian Vickers spun. No surprise there. To end the race with 5 laps remaining. Although Jr. was in the process of passing Gordon and beat him back to the finish line, NASCAR ruled that he finished second. Here, a few different rules tangled together. Apparently, being on the 5 to go lap meant it was too late to throw a red flag for an incident. So 6 to go was actually the last possible lap to get a red flag. And NASCAR had just introduced the freezing the field at the moment of caution rule this year. So racing back to the caution flag, even to win the race, was no longer doable. And the cherry on top was that it just happened to be Jeff Gordon of all people beating Dale Jr. So the result was a very drunk, angry, and confused Talladega crowd. So, only slightly worse than usual. It didn't help that the commentators also believed that NASCAR was going to attempt a green-white checkered finish to help clear up the issue of who won.
The question will be, can we get restarted?
I think we're going to have a green, white, and checker. That's the way it's looking to me.
Play all Budweiser cans.
However, that debris has come from that section of the grandstand.
In the wake of the controversy, NASCAR made the green-white checkered a formal procedure in the event of any late race cautions that would normally end the race. From 2004 to 2009, green-white checkers were limited to just a single attempt. In 2010, NASCAR spontaneously increased it to 3 attempts. But then, starting in 2015, they lowered it back down to 1 attempt without much of a good reason given. Later that same year in the Talladega Fall race, Jimmy Johnson would spin out coming to the restart, making NASCAR put the caution back out before the leaders made it to the green, which meant it didn't count as a real attempt. Okay, kinda dumb, but whatever, we gotta give Jr. another shot to win his way into the next round. But him doing so would likely have resulted in Kevin Harvick, whose engine was failing him in the closing laps, being eliminated. So coming to the second overtime restart that probably shouldn't have happened, Kevin Harvick junked the entire field to bring out the actual caution that would end the race, ensuring that he would move on to the round of 8, and Dale Jr., who finished second to Logano by inches before the caution flew, would be eliminated, and controversy emerged once more. Has anybody else noticed that almost every instance of this has involved Dale Jr. finishing second? It almost makes you wonder if people are more upset about the rules, or the fact that Jr. didn't win. It's probably the latter. But this would cause NASCAR to move to infinite overtime attempts starting in 2016, since NASCAR could no longer define what constituted an attempt at a restart. But this also led to the creation of the dreaded overtime line, placed roughly halfway down the backstretch at most tracks. If a caution came out after this line, the race was over. The problem was, NASCAR is either hovering over that caution button, or they're sleeping on the job. There's no in between. And after several controversial finishes in 2016 and 2017 involving inconsistent cautions before and after the overtime line, NASCAR scrapped it and just said, fine, race back to the white like you used to. Right now, we are currently in the longest stretch in NASCAR history without changes to the green-white checker procedure, but if we keep getting as many overtime attempts as we did in Nashville or COTA last year, then I fear that we may be getting a limit again sometime soon. Let's hope not. Alright, finally we're done with green-white checkered, so what are some other races that changed some rules in NASCAR? Well, Ross Chastain is NASCAR's premier rule bender. I won't call him a rule breaker because it's more like he finds loopholes in the rulebook and forces NASCAR to make the call after the fact. Like at the Indy Road course where he just avoided turn 1 entirely and took a Mario Kart shortcut to contend with Tyler Reddick for the win. Ultimately, NASCAR said, "Nice try, we're penalizing you," and later clarified that you could only take the access road to avoid a wreck that was already happening. You couldn't take it in anticipation of a wreck. But Ross went back to the drawing board and of course gifted us with the clip that keeps on giving at Martinsville later that year. Take a look at what he did! Yeah, we know. The wall ride had been attempted numerous times in the past, but to no avail. Carl Edwards tried it at Kansas in 2008, Larson at Darlington in 2021, and Sheldon Creed tried it only a few weeks earlier at Darlington in the Xfinity Series. After so many failed attempts, many believe that the wall ride was just a flashy but ultimately impractical move that was fated to never work as intended. But when Ross finally pulled it off, NASCAR and everybody else in the industry just had to say, "Wow, that was amazing, congratulations, but never do it again." And thus, the wall ride will be banned at the start of the 2023 season, citing safety concerns. And I think this was probably for the best, otherwise we might have 8 cars riding the wall at Martinsville to make the championship 4. Which would be kinda cool, not gonna lie. Now, as you can see, controversy is usually what leads to rule changes. But what about when sheer boredom leads to rule changes? Well, this was certainly the case in the 2000 Duralube 300 at New Hampshire. Due to the deaths of Adam Petty and Kenny Irwin Jr. at New Hampshire during practice sessions over the summer, NASCAR mandated the usage of restrictor plates for the fall New Hampshire race, which were usually reserved for just Daytona and Talladega. Drivers actually wanted to boycott the race until NASCAR added softballs at the track, which NASCAR wouldn't rule out until after the death of Dale Earnhardt the following year. So the restrictor plate was the only temporary solution to get drivers to actually run the race. The result was a race with almost no passing. The 2000 plate package was already notoriously bad at super speedways, and at New Hampshire, it was just downright awful. Nobody even got close to challenging Jeff Burton, who would lead every single lap of a NASCAR Cup race for the first time since Cale Yarborough in 1973. 24 years later, nobody has managed this feat since. Dale Earnhardt was irate after the race, saying, quote, "Race cars are race cars, not late model stock cars. They put late model stock cars on short tracks for kids to learn how to race. I guess NASCAR knows what they want. If they want sorry racing for the fans, that's what they got. If I was a race fan, I wouldn't buy a ticket to a restrictor plate race on a short track." Restrictor plates would never return to New Hampshire following this race. Lastly, we had to discuss some specific cars that forced NASCAR to change the rules, and oddly, both were from the All-Star race. In 1997, Jeff Gordon's infamous T-Rex car destroyed the competition at Charlotte Motor Speedway. Reportedly, NASCAR conducted a widespread investigation of the car at Hendrick Motorsports over the following days, and rewrote the rules to considerably tighten the restrictions around what could be done to Cup Series cars. Many believe that NASCAR just didn't want Jeff Gordon to dominate more than he already was, which is a valid concern. But NASCAR also said that they were afraid that the innovations that Hendrick Motorsports had made on the T-Rex car would lead to the entire field needing to rebuild their supply of cars to match the T-Rex. Even Hendrick Motorsports likely would have had to rebuild their entire fleet of existing cars to match the T-Rex. It would have led to one of the most rapid cost wars in NASCAR history that only the super teams could have kept up with. So to avoid an utter catastrophe that likely would have put many race teams out of business, NASCAR had no other choice but to eliminate most of the gray areas that teams used to work in. And this same philosophy is still at work today with a mostly spec next-gen car, as NASCAR seeks to cut costs and keep teams in a more even playing field. The T-Rex may have been NASCAR's most creative and innovative car of the modern era, but it also may have ironically led to the elimination of creativity in the garage. But 10 years after the infamous T-Rex, another team would use the All-Star race as a testing ground for forbidden techniques. This would be Team Penske and Sam Hornish's skewed COT. In the years leading up to the COT, skew was becoming commonplace in NASCAR, where the car would be slightly offset to the left to improve aerodynamics in the corners. And Sam Hornish took it to the next level in the 2008 All-Star weekend. With a car that noticeably looked like it was driving sideways in a straight line, Hornish dominated the weekend's practice sessions and cut through the field in the open to race his way into the main event. And despite early setbacks that put Sam 2 laps down in the main event, he made up the difference to finish 7th by the end of the night. Hornish would take a similarly skewed race car to finish 13th in the Coke 600 the following week. That may not sound impressive to the average fan, but bear in mind, Sam Hornish was no Jeff Gordon. He was an Indy 500 winner, sure, but at this point he was just a rookie struggling to adapt from open wheel racing to stock car racing, an art that he never quite figured out. Had almost any other driver in the field from a big team used the same exploit, they would have almost certainly swept the Charlotte races. And NASCAR foresaw that teams would follow Sam's lead in the coming weeks and quickly restricted how far the COT could be skewed. The car was already ugly enough as is, but imagine how much worse they could have looked while crab walking at 200 miles per hour. With the win in your in system we have today, imagine if teams found a loophole like this with the new car. You'd have teams randomly showing up with a trimmed out car at New Hampshire to win their way into the playoffs. It would be pure madness. Madness that I almost wish we got to see. But those are just a few races in NASCAR history that forced NASCAR to change the rules. I'm sure there are plenty of other examples, especially from the early days that I didn't name, so what are some others you can think of in the comments? But don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe for more videos just like this one, and check out dailydownforce.com for more awesome NASCAR content.